Chapter 1. The best part of dying was that she got to eat whatever she wanted. A gal had to count her blessings where she could find them. Avery licked the chocolate from her finger and crumpled the little white bag that had held the decadent eclair. She checked her face in the car's rearview mirror. None of her donut-for-dinner meal clung to her skin. The new makeup looked pretty good, effectively hiding the dark rings under her eyes. No sense giving strangers any clues to her struggles. She was here to celebrate, after all. Alone and not at all where she'd expected to be, but she wouldn't let such details derail her. Avery pulled her suitcase from the rental car's trunk and locked the doors. A grand Victorian stood like a genteel lady wrapped in sunset colors, the edges of her cloak dappled in the deep purple of evening. A cool ocean breeze tickled Avery's senses, slipping past the bare branches of ancient oaks that hid the Gulf of Mexico from view. What a stunning house! Avery paused at the sign, contemplating a selfie. But why bother? Only a few acquaintances at work would see the picture, and they thought she was on a little bit of, well, a less permanent vacation. Avery left the phone in her pocket, determined not to let melancholy thoughts rob her of her last month as a sane person adventure. The sprawling Victorian house nestled in the quaint seaside town hadn't been on her itinerary. Giving into spontaneous whims, however, had kind of become her thing. She smiled at the motto on the sign. Step back in time and leave your troubles behind. If only life were that simple. Avery pulled the wobbly suitcase behind her and mounted the steps to a pristine wraparound porch boasting an abundance of Christmas decorations. Poinsettias lined the railing, candles with dancing flames dotted the wide windows, and a wreath with a spray of greenery, festive ribbons, and sparkling ornaments graced the front door. She lifted her hand to knock, just as the door swung open. A woman with graying curls and a bright smile greeted her. "Hello, Miss Stuart." The woman gestured her inside. "I've been waiting for you. Do come in." Avery stepped into a front room that looked like something from a Hallmark movie. Every doorway dripped in garland. Every tabletop boasted a manger scene, glass tree, or shiny knickknack. At least she wouldn't be spending Christmas somewhere lacking character. "This way, dear. I have cookies in the kitchen." Avery followed the woman around a massive staircase, past several antique rooms, and to a wide kitchen, every bit as elegant as she'd come to expect from the graceful Victorian. "I hope you like snickerdoodles." The woman plucked a plate from a granite countertop and extended it in Avery's direction. The suitcase behind her clinked over the tiled floor as Avery drew closer. "Thank you, Miss, Silly me." The woman set the plate back on the counter. "I'm Mrs. Easley." Instead of offering her hand, the woman dropped into what Avery could only call the most perfect debutante curtsy she'd ever seen. "Oh, Avery positioned the suitcase upright. "Nice to meet you. I'm Avery." She clutched the suitcase handle. Sticking her hand out now would be awkward, even more so than stating her name to someone who already knew it. Though probably not any more awkward than a middle-aged woman curtsying in a pair of black slacks and a gaudy Christmas sweater. The kind with blinking lights. "I'm so glad you'll be joining us." Mrs. Easley bustled over to the long counter, positioned opposite a row of enchanting windows that would likely bathe the space in golden light come morning. She plucked a massive old book from a built-in shelf and plopped it onto the center island. Avery eyed the cookies. Should she grab one or wait for the lady to offer again? Sure, she'd just finished an eclair, but these smelled amazing. Mrs. Easley flopped open the front cover of the book and scanned what appeared to be a table of contents. Let's see, December. She ran her finger down a line. Ah, here we are. She flipped to a page a few chapters in. Miss Avery Stuart. A slight frown dipped her cheery lips as she paused, reading something. Sympathetic eyes glanced up for only a moment, then returned to the page. What in the world was in that book? Mrs. Easley closed the cover gently. You get the tower room, my dear." "The tower room? It is my favorite, you see." The words were soft, the same kind of soft that had come from Dr. Flynn. A smile stretched the older woman's lips. "From up there, you can see the ocean." Then why did the lady sound so sad? Before she could ask, Mrs. Easley scooped up the plate of cookies and shooed Avery out of the kitchen. "Would you like a tour?" "Sure." She followed behind her flighty hostess, soaking up the beauty of the house. "This is a very pretty place. I'm lucky to have stumbled across your website." "No such thing as luck, dear girl. You're exactly where you need to be." Avery withheld comment as Mrs. Easley showed her around the bottom floor, which consisted of a parlor, a library, an office, what appeared to be some kind of ballroom, and a massive dining room, all while still balancing a tray of cookies on one palm. Avery smothered a chuckle at Mrs. Easley's eccentricities. At least Christmas would be interesting with such unique company. "Will breakfast be served here?" Avery ran her eyes over the bounty of glittering decorations down the center of the table in the dining room. "That's usually where we eat. Yes." The answer had the oddest tinge of evasiveness to it. "Do you have many guests today?" A house full of people would go a long way to making her feel less lonesome, even if they were all strangers. Maybe she could organize a mixer. She pushed the thought aside. No, she was on vacation. No jumping back into the party planning job she left behind in Savannah. Mrs. Easley paused at the doorway, leading back out of the dining room. "Not today, dear. Today is for you." She turned away before Avery could come up with a suitable response. For her? Did that mean no one else would be staying? While a small-town Christmas had a nostalgic ring to it, she didn't fancy spending the holiday in a big house alone. She was starting to think the woman more than a tad eccentric. The lack of guests 3 days before Christmas wasn't exactly surprising, however. People had families to visit, parties to attend. Not many would be wandering around aimlessly on their own this time of year. Not that she would wish her fate on anyone simply so she could have company. Mrs. Easley led her up a winding staircase to the first landing overlooking the grand entryway. Even this small space held a multitude of decorations. "This is the main floor. Most of our guest rooms are located here." She waved an arm down a long hallway dotted with wall sconces. Up here, Avery could get a feel for what the sign outside had meant. She could almost picture herself having stepped back a century. Even the air felt different. But that was probably just her senses going haywire again. At the top of another set of stairs, this one far smaller and enclosed on either side by tight walls that nearly made her feel claustrophobic, they came to a heavy wooden door, the only one on this floor, apparently. This room, unlike the others, had no metal number. Mrs. Easley fished in her pocket and drew out a key. She hesitated a moment, then pulled in a deep breath before sliding the long metal rod into the lock. The door creaked open. An odd sensation washed over Avery, causing her skin to tingle. The feeling was gone in an instant. Was the unusual sensation another one of the symptoms that had been popping up lately? The doctor hadn't been able to say which one she'd be most likely to suffer in the coming months. Mrs. Easley produced a match from somewhere and lit a lantern on the table, then 2 more on the walls. She turned the wicks, and light reflected off shiny mirrors behind the flames to illuminate the space in warm hues. She didn't have any electricity up here? That might be a little further back in time than Avery wanted to go. At least it didn't feel cold. If she'd been given a room without heat, she'd find the next best Western and be on her way. "The tower room," Mrs. Easley motioned in a sweeping gesture. A massive bed took up a large hunk of the space, the canopy overhead draped with heavy curtains. A small writing desk, a dresser, a large wingback chair, and a stand with a wash basin completed the furnishings. 3 massive windows overlooked the front yard, their frames holding wispy lace sheers. Beyond the delicate curtains, Twilight touched the ripple of waves just visible over the tops of the trees. Mrs. Easley pointed to a door tucked in one corner. "We added a small bath some years ago. It's not big, but it gets the job done." Her gaze dropped to the platter of cookies she still carried as though just now remembering them. "Oh, yes, these are for you." She deposited the plate on the writing desk and ran a hand down her sweater. The room was nice, if a bit antiquated. The lack of lighting, however, had Avery concerned. She slipped her cell from the back pocket of her jeans. "Thanks." She toyed with her phone. She hadn't paid anything yet. She could probably still find another room. But then, she was feeling pretty drained. One night couldn't hurt. "Is there anything you'd like for the evening?" Mrs. Easley glanced around, seeming oddly reluctant to leave. "Anything special I can do for you?" Avery tapped a finger on the handle of her suitcase. "I might ride around and look at some Christmas lights later, if I'm not too tired. Any place you recommend?" "Downtown has a beautiful display." Mrs. Easley checked her watch. "Anything you'd like me to cook?" The plate of cookies would do. "No, thanks. I'm good." The woman hesitated in the doorway. "What about music? A book, maybe? How about a movie? I could bring up the television." Smiling, Avery shook her head. The woman was kind. "All good. I'll let you know if I think of anything." Mrs. Easley nodded, the lines around her mouth serious. "You do that, dear. I mean it." She hesitated only a moment longer. "Well, then, I suppose this is it. Good night." Avery bid the woman a good night and plopped her suitcase on the desk next to the cookies. An entire platter, just for her. How sweet. She'd stay one night. There would be more room somewhere else tomorrow, if she wanted to keep moving. She unzipped the top pocket of her suitcase and withdrew her favorite picture. She pressed a kiss to her fingertips, then gently touched the smiling faces of her parents, frozen behind timeless glass. "Pretty place, isn't it?" She set the framed photograph on the desk. Mom would love it here. The thought brought an immediate ache to her chest, sharp pangs of longing squeezing her heart. She dabbed a trickle of moisture from the corner of her eye before plastering on a smile. "What do you think if we stay here through Christmas, then continue to make our way out west? Should be able to hit the slopes by New Year's." Mind made, she unpacked enough clothes for a 3-night stay into the dresser and then looked around. That hadn't taken long. Maybe she should head out and go see the lights. The delectable scent of cinnamon and sugar tickled her senses. But first, she'd need a drink to go with her cookies. Snickerdoodles were her favorite, and the extra sugar would give her a boost. Avery wound her way back downstairs and to the kitchen, where she found the large book still sitting on the counter. Curious, she opened the hefty hardcover. The inside cover had the look of aged wallpaper with a swirling design, and the pages inside were thick and textured. She flipped to the first page. Then the next. Frowning, she lifted a chunk of pages and thumbed through them. Blank. Every one. Weird. She plucked a bottle of water from the fridge, hoping Mrs. Easley wouldn't mind. While she sipped it, she eyed the book, not sure which of the two of them might be crazy. She hesitated a moment longer, then made her way back upstairs. The woman was quirky. The show with the book was probably just some prop for the benefit of guests. Something to do with the historical feel of the place. In any event, Avery didn't get a creepy vibe. At least, not yet. Maybe she'd skip the cookies, though, just in case. By the time she reached the tower room, her head had started to pound. So much for the Christmas lights. Maybe she'd do that tomorrow. She'd done enough driving for today, anyway. Comfy pajamas and a Christmas rom-com were exactly what the doctor ordered. More or less. How did she find Mrs. Easley to request that TV? She pulled a sappy romance DVD from her suitcase and dropped it on the bed. Maybe Mrs. Easley had a Blu-ray player for her old favorite. If not, this place should at least have Netflix or cable. She'd head down to ask in a minute. pajamas first. She was crossing the room when she paused to examine a large drawing that hung on the wall. The center section contained a hand-drawn map depicting the region of Kent, England. Avery looked closer, the tiny lines of script and old-style drawings reeling her in. Leeds Castle, several manor houses, and a scattering of small villages were all marked with tight, flowing letters. A line of family crests in various designs decorated the bottom. Huh. Along both sides of the map, lines of genealogy stretched from the top to the bottom of the poster-sized frame drawing. The left side mapped the lineage of English royalty. About halfway down, a star stood out by one of the names. A matching star stood on the right. Avery moved her attention to the other side of the map. Sir Robert de Northwood, Avery read aloud. Barons, a whole line of them. Her eyes snagged on one line. Whoa, that's cool. She put her finger to the place where the name of the fourth Baron of Northwood was written with two little lines connecting it to another name. Lady Avery, foreign princess. Well, look at that! Avery winked at the picture of her parents. Did you know I share a name with a princess from some faraway land? Her cheerful voice faded, and silence settled heavily on the room. She knew talking to a photograph made her a bit crazy, but she couldn't give up the last fragment of connection with her parents. A well of sadness rose within her, and she had to force it back, replacing it with the happiness of fond memories. Her childhood had been marked with princess dresses, tiaras, and tea parties. Avery cast another look at the faces of the people who'd loved her so well. What she wouldn't give to spend this last Christmas with them. She brushed a tear from her eye and got ready for bed. She paused to look over the names once more, drawing her finger along the lines. I wonder what you were like, Mr. Baron of Northwood. A fuzzy feeling suddenly overcame her, and Avery took a step back. Her senses swam. Was dizziness a new symptom? Would she be forced to deal with this as well as the headaches? Holding a hand to her head, Avery stumbled to bed and stretched out on the covers. A moment later, everything went black. A cool breeze tickled over her face, nudging Avery out of her slumber. She probed her fingers along her temple, but the headache had dissipated as quickly as it had appeared. Goodness, that had been weird. Strange sensations converged upon her senses. Cold, damp air, something hard beneath her. Her eyes popped open, revealing a vast sky painted in sunset colors. She sat up. What in the world? She'd been lying on a hard bench, situated in a well-manicured garden. Had she been sleepwalking? Was that a symptom now, too? She swung her feet over the edge, surprised to discover she was wearing an elaborate gown. Transfixed, she ran her fingers over golden embroidery that created sparkling flowers on the turquoise and gold fabric. She stood, turning slightly. The skirt was wide, bellowing out from a narrow waist to completely hide her feet. The bodice fit perfectly, hugging her curves and draping across her neckline. Delicate lace dripped over her shoulders, creating enchanting cap sleeves in the same turquoise. The color scheme reminded her of a mermaid, or perhaps a peacock feather. Something heavy hung from her neck, and she toyed with a necklace. Large gems fell like water droplets from a golden chain, covering her collarbone in a display of sparkling decadence. Curious, her fingers lifted to her ears, where what she assumed to be matching jewels hung. Her long blonde hair tickled the top of her bare shoulders. She touched it gently and discovered what felt like an elaborate twist of curls. Oh, wow. On top of her head sat a crown, the fancy kind, with lots of points all around the top and an abundance of jewels. What in the world? Avery stood, turning in her massive princess gown. Realization dawned. Of course! She'd gone to bed, thinking about her father and her childhood days playing king and princess. She giggled. Never had a dream felt so real. The cold air played along her skin, and she rubbed her hands down her arms. This was awesome. As far as dreams went, she couldn't ask for a better one. Maybe vivid dreams could actually be a good side effect of her brain condition. She craned her neck, looking past the bushes she just now realized were dusted in snow. Behind them, a massive stone wall rose. She tilted her head back, following it up, up, up. A castle. Perfect! This was going to be fun! She lifted her skirt and made her way out of the secluded garden spot, looking for the front door. Maybe Dad would even be here, decked out in royal finery. And Mom would be wearing a gown even more beautiful than Avery's own. The thought had her hurrying forward and bursting out of a hedge wall. Wow. Old-fashioned carriages stood in a line, their wheels slowly rolling along a gravel drive. Lanterns hung from each one, giant fireflies swinging against the descending twilight. Smells of horses drifted on the air. Avery made her way past 3 carriages, all with curtains drawn over the windows. She craned her neck to where another large wall enclosed the open area in front of what looked to be the main castle entrance. After a black carriage passed through the gate, a metal portcullis lowered with a grinding screech. The castle regained her attention. It looked like something from a storybook. But then, why wouldn't it? Turrets and towers and tiny slit windows. Her imagination had gone into overdrive. "Lady," a man in a tunic and pair of leggings with knee-high boots approached from around the curve of carriages, a long cloak swirling behind him. He looked from Avery to the last carriage in the line and back again. He frowned. "Is something amiss?" "Amiss?" Avery laughed. What could possibly be amiss? Men and women in medieval costumes stepped out of the carriages, and knights, the kind in full armor, stood guard. Wow. A few of the costume people noticed her, their faces openly surprised. "My lady?" The man's mouth puckered, but he took in her attire and lowered into a bow. "Where is your escort?" Avery bounced on her toes, excitement bubbling through her veins. "Don't have one." Where was Dad? "May I offer my service?" The man extended his arm, his narrow face and sharp eyes watching her intently. Right, she really should be playing the part. Avery tilted her head, doing her best to act the princess. She lifted her eyebrows questioningly. "And who do I have the pleasure of addressing?" The man drew back, as though realizing he'd made some slip in propriety. "Forgive me, my lady. I am Wilhelm, the Lord's steward." He bowed again. "My apologies." He cast another look around, clearly dismayed. "May I ask where your retinue has gone?" He checked the line of carriages again, but the last had been emptied of guests and started to roll away. Avery waved a dismissive hand. "They dropped me off and left." That sounded better than saying she'd woken up in the garden, even though she didn't have to defend herself to a dream man. She rubbed her arms again. She didn't think she'd ever felt so cold in a dream before. How odd. Gravel crunched as the last carriage rolled away, disappearing behind the curve of the castle wall. The people had all gone inside, save for several of the knights, who took positions around the door. "Please, my lady." The tall man shifted, obviously nervous. What was with this guy? "Allow me to escort you inside before you catch a chill." Seeing as how she was rather interested in viewing the interior of the castle, Avery placed her hand on top of the man's extended elbow in a perfect princess kind of way. The lanky man guided her toward the stairs leading to the main castle structure enclosed within the wall. "May I ask if you have come for the Baron's festivities, milady?" Festivities? Like a ball? Excitement surged through her. Perfect. "Why, of course I have. I'm rather excited to attend a baron's ball." Wilhelm cast a glance at her, something in his gaze appraising. "And your name?" If I may be so bold as to ask, milady." All this "my lady" stuff reminded her of her childhood games. If she was going to have an amazing princess dream, then she might as well make the most of it. She straightened herself to her most regal bearing. "I am Princess Avery of the Kingdom of Gardenia." The man's footsteps faltered. "I am unfamiliar with this kingdom. Is it on the continent?" "It's quite far. I've traveled a great distance to meet your baron. I do so hope he doesn't disappoint." The man drew back his thin shoulders. "I am certain his lordship will be most interested in meeting you as well." His gaze darted to the crown on her head. "Your Highness." Avery placed her fingers over her lips to contain a laugh. Oh, yes, this was going to be fun.